Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so picking up with DCeased number 2, this story is so good. Here's the thing about Tom Taylor writing, man. Tom Taylor writing is legit. Like okay, Tom Taylor's really good at writing like dark stories, right? It's just like things are popping off and people are dying. Get Tom Taylor to write it. Like Tom Taylor's really good at that. I would not give like Captain America to Tom Taylor, although it probably would be a pretty cool story. It'd be dark, but it'd be probably a pretty cool story. Okay, somebody more upbeat, somebody more lighthearted, right? Like I would not give a Spider-Man story to Tom Taylor. There we go. Like I wouldn't give Spider-Man to Tom Taylor, because he would write a pretty dark Spider-Man story. But the world's ending because like Cyborg released a virus onto the world, like was a carrier for the anti-life equation, which spread through technology. Yeah, man, let Tom Taylor write that story. and it turns out exactly the way you would expect, because again, from the first video that we saw, that's basically what's happening, right? Like Darkseid had essentially found the anti-life equation, and then Darkseid was corrupted by this sort of twisted version of the anti-life equation that he essentially created. And then in turn, with Cyborg being a carrier for it, Cyborg was kind of teleported back to Earth when like Darkseid became corrupt and went crazy and everything. And then Cyborg released it into the internet, right? Like released it over the digital space, which basically is kind of like this digital virus, right? So for those of you guys who saw, whoever read Cellular, I think it was called Cellular, by Stephen King, that's basically it, right? Like a virus that spreads throughout the world using digital information. And it works exceedingly well. And that's one of the things I like about this, right? Like if this was a direct copy of Marvel Zombies, well then something, now we have zombies, people are being bitten and they're turning into zombies, right? But like that's been done before. What better way to create a kind of zombie story more or less than to like have it spread through the internet like we saw in Final Crisis? It's a great way to do it. It's a really cool concept. And so in this one, we basically pick up in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with Aquaman. And Aquaman's just kind of like, okay, so like there's a boat out here in the middle of nowhere and like cargo's dumping everywhere and like things are popping off. What in the world's happening? And like when he opens this door of the ship in the hold, there's like monsters everywhere. And Aquaman just flees for his life. This is kind of cool because what this does is it begs the question, can Atlantis be affected, right? Because like what you're talking, and we'll talk more about this here once we get towards the end of the video, because Tom Taylor kind of indirectly answers that question. But with Atlantis being so far below the surface, and in a lot of ways being in a place where you kind of have to wear like a pressurized suit, otherwise the sheer pressure would probably crush you. It's a question of like, can people make it down there with no protection whatsoever in order to successfully infiltrate the place? But at this point, we kind of jump over to Metropolis, right? And so you got Jonathan Kent, you've got Damian Wayne, you've got Lois Lane, and you've got Superman. Now again, they're kind of picking up in the middle of all this, and that's the nature of this whole thing. Remember, it spread so far so fast, like it was like Skynet going live. In the blink of an eye, this virus was all over the world, and just like everything's kind of falling all at the same time. But it also restricts their ability to be able to access, to be able to speak to different people, right? Like Lois Lane's response is, we have to go to the Daily Planet. But our first inclination is, that won't do you any good because it's being spread to the digital space. So anybody who picks up like a cellular phone or anything that's connected to the internet, like a smartphone or something like that, they're going to be infected by this anti-life equation. So you need something like a rotary phone, right? Like you need something that's like old hat technology, analog information. And so it's kind of a cool little thing because presumably the Daily Planet has that. Now the other half of this is of course Damian Wayne's freaking out over Batman. And that's one thing I want you guys to notice is this story of course takes place it doesn't take place in the main DC continuity, but it does include the characters as they exist right now, right? Like Damian Wayne's a little bit older. Jonathan Kent is of course older. There's a couple steps that we can take to sort of make this fit in the sense of like, we can kind of assume that things haven't progressed the exact same way, right? Like Jonathan was not taken by his grandfather into space and then aged up. We can assume a lot of those things didn't happen. So like Bendis, the Bendis's version of Superman doesn't take place in this universe. Instead, they just kind of aged up accordingly, right? They're just some number of years older than they normally are. And we can just kind of call it a day, right? Like we can just sort of take those leniences and be done with it. But switching over to Harley Quinn, this is an important thing because what this shows is not everyone's aware of what's going on. And for the most part, even those who are aware of what's going on don't really seem to have the full understanding of what's happening, right? Like picking up with Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy, there's no indication here that like zombies are infecting everything or anything like that. They're just kind of having a general conversation. Poison Ivy's like, hey, you got to go in there and you got to do your thing. When you come out, I'll be waiting for you in the Botanic Gardens. Everything's going to be okay. Harley Quinn has no real idea what's going on, and neither seemingly does Poison Ivy. And so when Harley Quinn walks into this room, we of course realize she's talking to the Joker. She's like, hey, I came here to tell you I'm running off with Poison Ivy. I'm leaving here and I'm never coming back, our life together is over. And it's at that point that we find out that Joker has basically been turned into one of these zombies. Now, here's a cool question to be asked here. Here's the cool question that we need to ask here. If the Joker is one of these zombie monsters, is there any real difference? Like, that's the cool question to ask. And I guess it depends on which version of the Joker you're talking about, right? Like, if you're talking about Steve Englehart Joker, right? Like the version that Batman the Animated Series was based off of, then yeah, you probably see a pretty big difference. But if we're talking about like Scott Snyder, New 52, Death of the Family Joker, like honestly, I don't know if you'd see that huge of a difference. He would just seem more crazy than usual. Now, here's the thing I want to see. I want to see Zombie Joker versus the Batman Who Laughs. That's what I want to see. Let me tell you something, man. Dude, I'd pay however much money DC's charging to read that one shot. Oh, dude, they'd be like, it's $100 to read this. And I would be like, here you go. Like, I'd just be like, take my money. I wouldn't even care. It'd be amazing to see. But in this moment, Joker is basically infected by this virus, more or less, and is presumably going to tear apart Harley Quinn. And so from here, we actually shift over to what I think is one of the coolest moments in the entire story when we pick up outside of Metropolis. Now, again, this is kind of an important thing to bear in mind here. Unless you're in a major city, you for the most part don't really know what's going on, and that makes the most sense, right? I mean, those individuals who are in like major metropolitan areas are usually tapped in more in the digital space than those who are in like outlying rural territories, right? I mean, as a guy who lived in Kentucky, Lexington and Louisville are the two biggest cities, and so everything outside of that, you got Richmond, you got Winchester, Versailles, Harrodsburg, and then you go out further and you run into places like Rockcastle County and things like that. And the further out you go, and even the closer you go east to the Appalachian Mountains, the less technologically advanced people become. And so when you're in that kind of an environment, when you're further out and you're not tapped into the digital space at the time that this goes down, you have no idea what's going on because you're so far removed from the environment around you. Now, you would kind of expect that like the various explosions that we're hearing or seeing and things like that in Metropolis, at the very least, that noise would reach the ear of like Black Canary and Oliver Queen, Green Arrow, and Hal Jordan. You would expect that it would reach them, but for whatever reason, it hasn't. Maybe they're just so far outside of Metropolis that they're not really picking up on it. But the cool thing is they're kind of going back and forth and having their own little banter, and it's actually kind of a cool tip of the nod. And the reason why is because if you're not really familiar with the history of Green Lantern, Green Arrow, it doesn't really resonate with you. But for those people who do, there's a lot of not really callbacks, but just kind of a great little bit of nostalgia here, right? Because like Green Lantern and Green Arrow, those two guys were brought together because their comics weren't really selling. And so DC merged them together and basically put them in a singular story where it was essentially a team-up book for like a number of years. And here's the funny thing, is it was actually incredibly popular. Like it was insanely popular. You wouldn't expect it to be, but it was. Oh, it was hugely popular. And people loved it because of the dynamic, right? You had the joking nature of Oliver Queen combined with the more serious tone of Hal Jordan. And you got some great stories by Neil Adams and Dennis O'Neil, right? Like Snowbirds Don't Fly, different things like that. But again, these guys have been exceedingly good friends for a very, very long time. And so that's why it's kind of cool to see them paired together. So for people who are fans of Green Arrow and Green Lantern, they kind of look at this and they say, hey, like this is a cool little throwback, a cool little tip of the nod to the old stories from yesteryear. But of course, you know, they're also kind of giving Hal Jordan a hard time because he's so serious all the time. So they're like, you're like the Killjoy, right? Like Oliver Queen jumps up and he was like Hal Jordan, you have the ability to suck the fun out of every situation. Welcome to the Killjoy Corps. Which in all honesty, I kind of want to see that, right? Like just a bunch of cynical jerks just going around and just being like, I don't enjoy anything and nothing's fun or happy and I just complain about everything all the time. So basically like a huge portion of Twitter, right? Like the Killjoy Corps. So like I think it'd be funny. Like I think it'd be kind of interesting, right? Just like this little mini series where it's just a bunch of like, okay, that's what you do. You just like basically make it like people on Twitter, right? People who are just like, you know, I just want to be upset about something. So I'm just going to tweet about things that I'm angry about and hope that somebody listens and hope that I can fix my life, even though I can't. Not by tweeting on Twitter. But like, I want to see like that mini series just focuses on them, right? Like just some keyboard warrior at home trying to change the world from a lounge chair. I really want to see, I really want to see that story. I think it would be hilarious. But nonetheless, you know, once Hal Jordan actually like goes into his tent, that's when everything begins to go crazy, right? Because then it's just like, okay, so he gets on his phone and then of course he's immediately hit with the virus and then starts losing his mind and then like busts out. So what we've got is basically like this zombified Hal Jordan as a Green Lantern wielding the power of a Green Lantern, a zombie Green Lantern. It's the coolest thing ever. In a lot of ways, he almost reminds me of like a combination of the Sinestro Corps and the Red Lanterns, right? Because like the ring immediately says like lethal force is not sanctioned, right? So like you cannot kill people. Now here's the funny thing is it almost kind of seems like Sinestro Corps War never happened, right? Because Sinestro Corps War is when things change and the Green Lanterns could start killing people. So presumably like Sinestro doesn't exist or the Sinestro Corps War never took place. Whatever the case is, Green Lanterns can't kill folks. And so it's kind of crazy because like he's trying to kill them. Now here's where the big saving grace comes in, because then you've got like Oliver Queen who's basically attacked by Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan goes to kill him and then Dinah Lance, the Black Canary, just like screams in the face of Hal Jordan and just like destroys his eardrums. And it's a crazy thing because like it basically like, you know, scrambles his brains and it kills him. And then it's Hal Jordan, Green Lantern of Sector 2814 deceased, scanning for replacement found. Dinah Lance of Earth, you have the ability to overcome great fear. Welcome to the Green Lanterns. And it's just like, wow, like it's the coolest thing. Never in my life did I think it would be cool to see Black Canary become a Green Lantern, but I'm excited about that because imagine what she can do with hard-light constructs and a sonic scream. I'm really excited by it, right? I mean, you can tell there's obvious influence from Injustice in this story, right? Like taking someone's set of powers and throwing it onto somebody else that you would least expect, and then just kind of seeing how things play out. There's obviously a lot of injustice going on in terms of how this story is being written, but it's really, really awesome. Now, of course, once you end up having Superman and company, Superman, Damian, Jonathan, and Lois showing up at the Daily Planet, it's exactly what we would expect, right? You know, Superman's like, hey, stay here. This place is filled with monsters. So basically, you know, from how Superman responds to Lois's question, is it people we know? Superman, of course, looks sad and says yes. So we can assume Perry White, we can assume Jimmy Olsen, we can assume a lot of the people who have traditionally been the supporting cast of the Superman comics are essentially infected, and they're caught up by this virus. And so with this cool thing happening, Superman, of course, does the one thing you're never supposed to do. I'll be right back. Which usually never happens. That's never usually the case. But of course, the reason why he takes off is not to go into the Daily Planet. It's because he heard a scream. And that's when he races over and he ends up realizing that like, hey, like Black Canary is the Green Lantern. We need you to have these powers. Like we need you with us. You have to come along here. And so with that in mind, like with, of course, Black Canary in tow, bringing Oliver Queen, they all basically show up here at, they kind of return to the Daily Planet. And that's when Batman chimes in. And it's like, okay. So Batman basically says, hey, look, they're not really zombies in the traditional sense. They don't desire to consume flesh. They're basically the anti-life, right? Like these are individuals who have been infected with the anti-life equation. All they want to do is spread this anti-life, right? So, it's kind of saying they're dead, but they're not dead. It's interesting because what Tom Taylor really kind of seems to indicate here, there may be a way to bring them back. But what he really does is kind of clear that up right off the bat when Batman says, you can't cure them. There's no way to bring them back. Those individuals that we lost are now gone. Whatever percentage of the world's population is now infected forever. And so if you're not tapped into a phone and you're bitten by one of these guys, you are now infected with anti-life, and the only way to basically deal with you is to kill you. So in a sense, they are basically zombies, just by a different name, right? Like the only thing they lack is just consuming flesh. They're zombies under a different circumstance. But again, this is actually a pretty sad moment because of course, you got Alfred standing by with a shotgun, and you've got Batman in the suit of Mr. Freeze, basically cooling his body down, slowing his metabolism, and keeping the virus from like overrunning him. But he basically says like, there's no cure for me. There's nothing I can do here. Like I am going to die. Like I'm going to become one of those things. There's no way for me to kind of go back to who I was. And there's almost like some doubt here, right? I mean, Oliver Queen's just like, no, you're Batman, dude. Like Oliver Queen is like the voice of the fan, right? He's like, no, you're Batman, dude. Like you have prep time or some fill in the blank reason, but like you always come back from this. And it's kind of cool because Batman doesn't have prep time because Batman's not prepared for it, which of course always answers the question, what happens when Batman doesn't have prep time? He dies. So it's kind of a cool little thing here. Like it's kind of a cool little moment of like Batman, like the world, like everybody's saying goodbye to Batman, saying like, there's no way we can bring you back. And this is a really touching moment because Batman then starts talking to Damian and he's like, hey, look, like Alfred has something for you. It's something I always left for you. I knew you would earn it. Notice this is something Batman doesn't say. Batman doesn't say, I love you, son. Like he doesn't say, I love you. You're my son. He of course dresses him as son, but he doesn't really say like, I love you and I always will, or something along those lines. You don't really see that kind of tender moment, right? You just kind of see Batman being Batman where it's like, I left something for you. You would have earned it one day anyway. You would have taken this up, which of course we know that it's basically the bat suit that Damian Wayne is going to become Batman. And so it's kind of a crazy thing because of course at that point in time, that's when Bruce begins to switch, right? Like that's when he starts to turn into this zombified version. And it's the craziest thing because Alfred does the only thing he can do. He says, cease transmission. It never should have ended for you this way. I'm sorry, son. And then there's a shotgun fire. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.